All right, I think we're good. Hey. Flipping all the cables and everything. All right, let's get started something. I've got one or two PRs that I'd like to finish up. Reflect stuff. This PR is one that I want to finish up, that I need to make a couple changes to. TLDR is, some people were talking about like anchor-based positioning in like the context of CSS layout algorithms versus other things. Hey Anders, good morning. I guess it's not morning for you, but good day. So people were talking about CSS layout algorithms and like alternatives and more form and things like that. And one of the things that came up was anchor-based positioning. And anchor-based positioning, as people were talking about it, is basically just CSS absolute positioning. So I took what I know from CSS and I built an example that basically anchors a box inside of another box to kind of just show what that looks like. There's a little bit of feedback. I missed some of the new nice helpers in 0.17. So I'm going to go through the PR, update some of these, pull the changes. I can do these right on the site. Oh, the diff is outdated. That's an old... I already committed those on the site, so I'll have to pull. We could make this a grid. I don't know if I'm going to. And then the other thing is like, check to see if these labels can actually hold their full label or not. But we'll see. Hey Crods, how's it going? So I think I have that open here. I'm gonna stash some. I don't know. I was going to maybe update the serialization for reflection example. Mainly just because the thing with reflection right now that I'm kind of on a quest to deal with is a lot of people don't know that it exists or what it does. Well, they kind of know it exists, but like don't know what it does, don't know what they can use it for, don't know how to use it. And we end up with a bunch of crates in the ecosystem that do things like derive Faraday serialization or serialize and deserialize traits, which you don't need if you use reflect. And actually, if you choose to engage with Faraday serialize and deserialize traits, you can end up with more code gen, which is a slower compile, etc. So like we already have the serialization implementation in the reflection traits, and that's what this example is for. So I was just playing with the idea of serialization for just using reflect. Still depends on Faraday under the hood. So it's not like we're getting rid of Faraday at all. What we're getting rid of here is the extra code that we don't need to generate to implement serialization for all these structs. So you end up still with like Faraday JSON to string, but you use an alternative serializer, is what happens here. Same thing for deserialization, right? You use the Faraday JSON deserializer and the reflect serializer, and you use them together. So like, this could be this instead. And I think that the way that it is by default, which I also wrote, so is that I originally wrote it like this with the implication of sometimes you want to deal with something that is just a Faraday value that came from somewhere. So like it came from, you know, a Faraday JSON API endpoint parse, or a you know, a random RON file, or like a, you know, postcard or whatever, right? It comes in as a Faraday JSON, you know, value of some kind through the Faraday data model. Once you get that, that can get passed into the reflect deserializer. So we could also do same thing here with that other change that we made before. And now this is just the reflect deserializer. We call deserialize on it with that value, and you get your reflected value. Interesting thing about the reflected serializer is it will give you the concrete type if it can. If it can't, it will give you a dynamic struct, or a dynamic, you know, tuple struct, or a dynamic whatever you have. So this reflects value actually comes out as a boxed Dyn partial reflect. I don't know if Rust Analyzer will show that. There it is. So that's kind of why I have these lines separated out, because it's easier to, like, as a learning resource use. You don't need them to be on separate lines. So this reflect value is a box Dyn partial reflect. And what will happen is if it can deserialize to a concrete type, it will. If it can't, it'll give you back a dynamic struct. And then you can use this with other commands. So like insert reflect, reflect value works. This is actually on entity. So like dot entity, whatever our entity is, insert reflect. So you can get reflect values from anywhere, right? These could be from files. This is how I do it inside of Skein, etc. Like we can work with reflect values without deriving the serialized and deserialized traits. So I was just playing with the idea of changing this example a little bit to be this instead. Because like it gets the point across that you like only add one line and then you still get the serialization that you want. Whereas the original reason I wrote it like this is kind of like, if you don't need to interact with something that expects Faraday specifically, right? If it doesn't say like accepts an argument that implements Faraday's serialized trait specifically, and you get to write, you know, like your serialize or deserialize or whatever, then it's one line, right? So you get to do this specifically. If you do have to interact with something that is like expecting you to like give it a Faraday concrete value that it can come out with, you can pass in like a Faraday JSON value to that function, type argument, whatever, and you get back a Faraday JSON value, and then you can still use that value to deserialize into the Bevy types. So that's why I wrote the deserialize like this instead of like this. Both of them work. I think that one of the things that I realized is that people are going to be copy pasting this. Like I knew they were going to copy paste it, but I think that it's not obvious. So we've got reflex deserializer here, but people don't know that this exists, like Faraday JSON deserializer. So I don't know. I'm gonna put a little bit more thought into this specifically. Actually, what I'll probably do is I will screenshot this for myself, save it for later, stash it to work on the other PR. Well, stash it if I can do it correctly. And then this is our anchor layout PR. So cargo run example, anchor layout. Hey Xavier, good morning. Hey Anas, how are you? I'm doing all right. I'm a little tired today. I woke up, I very nearly decided that I needed to go back to bed. It was very close. but I decided that I wanted to at least put in an hour on stream, so here I am. So this kind of like anchor positioning, you can see as these boxes change sizes, these interior boxes are all stuck to where they should be. So the question is, I think there are two comments on the PR, right? One is, hey, maybe we should make these labels bigger, which I think we can do. And then the other one is grid. So let's start with the labels. I think this is going to be pretty easy. So we're going to have a slash in all of these. And we'll just do like new line colon 10 pixels. And we will kind of, I don't have the file watcher set up, so it's not like it's going to reload or anything. So now it looks like this instead. So as long as that text can actually fit, so you see how in the bottom left, the word bottom is as a single word contiguously too long for the box. That is not something we need to worry about. That is just like if you have a singular contiguous word that is not going to be hyphenated, that is too long, then text renders like that. So I think most people will be viewing it something more like this, maybe. So maybe we copy that. And I will commit new labels. I'll push this. Oh, you know what I need to do, actually? I think I need to pull. Let me try to push this. It'll tell me that I can't push. I don't know. We don't talk about Git very much here. But basically, we committed to a branch. We put that branch up in a PR. So that branch is being kind of like referenced on GitHub. I have now committed on the website. So there were some suggestions here to use some shorthands. I committed those on the website using the button. That means there are 2 commits here that we don't have. And then I've made a commit locally in the meantime as well. So we have 2 commits remote that I don't have locally, and 1 commit locally that isn't remote. So what we're going to do is, I believe we're origin, yeah. So we're gonna pull, we don't actually need to rebase. But in this case, if we rebase on whatever's remote, then our commit will layer on top. So basically what we're doing is we're saying, we have the first commit, remote has 2 commits, and then we have a commit. And right now, our commit and the 2 remote commits are at the same kind of like priority level, if you want to say. So what we're going to do is we're going to move our commit down and move these 2 commits in. What is the branch name here? Anchor. Anchor position. Make sure you can read from the remote repository. I have no idea what happened there. GitHub decided it didn't want to serve that request, I guess. Weird. So now we've pulled and we've rebased, so I should be able to look at the commits here. And we have these 2 like GitHub commits in our Git log. These are custom Git shorthands for things that are really nice. Good day, XJob. How are you? GitHub core. So, also, I don't know why I have one name in some commits and one name in other commits. I think if I commit something on the website, it uses my short name, and if I commit something locally, it uses my long name. I don't know. I got to figure that out. That's weird. Both of those have the same email, but so I should be able to push this now because we rebased. We didn't change anything remote, but we moved our commit down to the bottom of the stack of commits that are on the remote. And see, we have these two commits here, which are the commits from GitHub, and then my new labels commit at the end. So resolve that conversation, and then we have one more comment. We could make this a grid. The reason I did it like this is because I was working off of the context of a different exercise or a different example. So let's see. Do we want to? This is our anchored node. This contains the like gray and whatever. So if we run this, we've got these gray boxes, and then we've got the red boxes inside of them. Here's our gray box, this outer node, and then this is our, so we've only got one child in here, but this is our red box, and then the text inside of it is here. So that means this spawnator is spawning all of those boxes. And for each row, we've got this like flex direction row thing going on. We, technically speaking, don't need this. Because we could put it here. Let's see. Is that what we're going to do? So theoretically, we would do display, display grid. We've got all the grid stuff. I think by default these will be fine. I don't think we get row gap anymore. Row gap, column gap. I don't remember, because there's this gap in CSS, right? So we'll have to check to see if this padding is what we think it's going to be. So then we've got these rows. These rows, our goal here is to get rid of this interior array situation. So we'll get rid of that extra structure. These are all now one flat array of nodes. And then we don't need this outer builder because we're not creating rows anymore. Which means that now we have basically with children with all these rows. So I think we move this rows out. I wonder if we can make this a const. Probably not. And then we can take this and move it into the children. This is just rows.intuiter. We get rid of this children. I think this is going to result in us needing this font clone, but I don't know yet. We need to have a semicolon to not return that value. And then we need, let's see, anchored node. And this will be, I guess we didn't specify the columns here. So let's do that. Let's put this down here. We'll do grid template columns. I think grid template columns is what we want. So grid template rows. So we want like 3 by 3, right? So that should give us like a 3 by 3 grid. I guess this is a vec of repeats. So technically speaking, this is vec. What's the difference between repeated grid track and grid track repetition? That's an interesting question. This is how many times to repeat. Yes. And then that's the container. So we end up with grid template columns in our grid, right? Hang on. Grid template columns in node. And then this is a vec of repeated grid tracks. Where do we use grid track repetition then? I feel like the types make it feel weird here. These feel like they're named really weird. So we've got grid track repetition, and what does it want us to use? Repeated grid track? So what's the difference? Grid track repetition is a count, and then repeated grid track. It's also a count. Why do we have both of these types? Oh, this is... Okay, so this is just the repeat field, then? There's a special type for just the repeat field? Yeah, grid template columns repeat 260. That feels like... that should go where we put it. And then this is a possibly repeated grid track. Why does this not work? This feels like... Shouldn't this work? This is what I had originally. Expected a vec of repeated grid tracks. Found grid track repetition. These need to have different names. Found. This is using it right where we're using it, right? Repeated grid track. No, this is a different type. Repeated grid track, and we're using grid track repetition. So it wants us to write this instead, because this is just a count. So where do we use, so we're using repeated grid track. Where do we actually use okay, so this is because I feel like this needs to be called repeated grid track count or something. The naming here is exceedingly weird. Is this what they're referred to in the spec as? No. There's no name for this. This is name repeat. No, that's not the name of it. This is the variables. So flex length, percentage, track size, auto, etc., etc. I think we came up with this name. And since we came up with this name, it only exists inside of Bevy, and therefore we can change it to whatever we want. And I think that we should change this to either repeated grid track count or something like that. I feel like this doesn't have any other use, right? Yeah, it's only used there, so in any case. These are floats. And then our item here are we calling this grid placement? Repeat is a CSS grid thing. Yeah, the repeat is not whatchamacallit. Yes, repeat is a CSS grid thing, but the name we're using for the type for the value of grid template columns and the value inside of that is weird, right? Like we have grid template columns, which should probably be called grid template columns, right? Everything else that you work with here is either a value or the name of the field, right? So if it's gonna be like a pixel value or something is percent or pixels or whatever, it's a VAL, right? If it has a name, then it's display flex. So we have invented repeated grid track and grid track repetition as names, I think. Right, repeat is CSS grid. Grid track repetition I don't know how you're supposed to get from... What is going on? I feel like docs.rs's search has been breaking for me over the last like 24 hours. This is the issue. We have grid track repetition here. Brand new name, doesn't exist in CSS grid. Not the value. The value exists, but it's like the repeat value in CSS grid. How are you supposed to go from I know what a repeat is to I should look for grid track repetition or repeated grid track? There's no like back and forth there for the naming scheme. And the fact that these are like reversed is really weird. Like this is repeated grid track and the other one is grid track repeated. So I think that's really confusing. Like we invented those names. We can invent better names if we're going to call them things. But yes, like this is what I was trying to write, right? Like repeat whatever, or like 1FR, whatever. Like this is our VEC, right? VEC 1FR repeat, right? But yeah, the names are really weird. Which brings us to, we've got grid template columns, we've got 3FR, 3FR, full window, we've got padding, row graph, display grid. These children should be able to fit into specific spots. Let me just check. And for some reason they aren't. I guess the width and the height are overriding and going full width. Feels a little weird. Yeah, and then up here we'll need column gap. And then we end up back at where we were, but with grid instead of flex. And everything still works, so I'm okay with that. I feel like this width and height being 100% and not getting its height from... I guess grid then takes up the whole thing, so that makes sense. So I'm not a huge fan of these repeated names for the grid tracks. Maybe I'll go back and see if I can do a pass and hopefully helpfully come up with different names. I feel like we have CSS as like the basis of how this works. And for most cases, it works pretty well, especially with the new constructors here. So now we have pixel value, percent value, etc. Things like display grid, display flex, display whatever, block. That all makes sense because then like you just type display after. I guess people consider that stutter, but I think that's a fairly good discovery mechanism because like, if you don't have Rust Analyzer, or like you don't have the syntax, like look at this, how this is not suggesting. I need this to show up. Display block, display flex, display whatever. So I think this is fine. And this goes one-to-one, right? If I'm trying to set a display, and I would set a display in CSS to get what I want, that is also display in Bevy. Grid template columns, I feel like I get why repeated grid track is here because I think it's called a similar thing in the CSS spec. Maybe it's not. Grid track is a generic term for grid column or grid row. But do we have repeated in there anywhere? I don't think so. So I don't know. I'll have to go back and do some like conversion analysis, because we should be able to mostly go from one thing to another. And in CSS, you're like this, right? Like this is what you write. Or like in this case, it's actually this. So like maybe we just need a constructor here, right? Maybe we need a repeat constructor. But otherwise, I think this is good. So I think that'll finish that PR off. This will get main merged in on top of it, but I don't think anything. Ixchamp also is the person who made those new constructors. The new constructors are pretty sweet. But I think that finishes this example. So now this example is going to live inside of Bevy in the UI stuff. It looks like 0.17 is going to come out on Monday, by the way. Anybody who's hanging out waiting for 0.17. Let's see. What else do I have over here? Yes. So another thing, I have another PR open for the Bevy CLI. And the feedback here is put some instructions in different places. So combine it with the Bevy lint instructions, sure. So right now I have a PR open to do a change to the README for the Bevy CLI for the linter, because the linter has to be installed if you install. Oh, question about repeated values. Can you specify non-repeated values like grid template rows, 1FR, 30 pix auto? Yes, it's a VEC. It doesn't get released until your video is up. Well, hopefully the video will come on Monday. I've planned Sunday. I'm catching up on This Week in Bevy. I know that the This Week in Bevy videos have been lagging a bit lately. I've had client work that funds that work that I've had to focus on. The two things that the two things that fund This Week in Bevy work are Rust Adventure, which you can use your corporate education budget for if you haven't spent that this year yet. And also I do some client work to supplement that income. So I had client work over the last month or two that has been actually also content development work. So it's been a lot of writing. It's been like minimum 1,000 words a day, every day for like 2 months now. But yeah, grid template rows, 1FR, 30 pix auto, you can specify all of that, because grid template rows is technically a VEC. Right, it's a VEC of repeated grid track, which is also weird, right? because it's like it's a vec of a thing called repeated grid track. So you're like, okay, why is this a vec of a repeated grid track? And the answer is that you can actually stick, you know, any number of repeated grid tracks inside of it. You could have like 3 FRs followed by 3 30 pixels followed by 3 whatevers, you know? Do we have grid track? We do have grid track. The difference here being a grid track is a singular track. And these are presumably pretty generic because we use them in multiple contexts. I don't think that's true though. All right, grid track flex value goes to a T, where T implements from grid track. So that's why we're calling these repeated grid track. I feel like we should put it the other direction. Like if you can put grid track in here, and you could put repeated grid track in here, then it should be grid track and grid track repeated. Because otherwise it's like reversed a little bit weird. Anyway, that's another a thing for another day. But we are going to take this suggestion and put it where it needs to go for the CLI. So I'm still on that branch, so I'm just going to make the change. The install up here is just for the CLI, so I think they're just saying, yeah, check the code quality with the linter, and then they want this as a singular code block, I guess, so we'll do the singular code block instead. It's one of those things where maintainer has made suggestion. Suggestion doesn't fundamentally matter from my perspective. Why is that weirdly formatted? That's 4. That's 3. That's 4. That's 4. Okay, not my job to clean this up, but this could easily become that. Basically, if they don't run an auto formatter on their markdown, then I'm not going to make unrelated changes to format it. So we check the code quality with the linter. This will install the latest version, and this will lint it. So I think that's fine. That gets the information that I wanted here into the README. So I'm cool with that. So we'll just commit that and push it up. Why? Wait. Why is this? Oh, because I made a commit on this website again, so we'll need to git pull rebase lint install. And then we actually have a conflict, technically speaking. But we're just getting rid of the old stuff anyway. And this is what we want. Right? Rebase, continue. So the process there, I actually went through that really quickly because I wasn't intending to explain it. The process there is we do a git pull rebase against the remote branch, or the branch that we've pushed to GitHub. That comes back and says, hey, there's a conflict. So it puts us into this intermediary state where we have all the files in our directory, and we have this UU conflicts thing happening here. Those conflicts show up in the file actually as regular text. It shows you both versions. VS Code happens to have some nice UI for like selecting one or the other, but if you're not using VS Code, if you're using like TextEdit or something, then you just have to like pick one and delete some characters. So once we did that, we can do git add -u to add these back into staging or whatever you want to call it. And then we have to do git rebase continue to finish the rebase, which is only one commit, so it was really fast. And now we're ahead one, so we can push. And there's our commit up here. I think that, are these checks going to run? These checks are going to run. I'll let the checks run, and then I will change the labels. I don't know, actually. I actually don't have access on the CLI to change labels. So I'll just push my commit. I can change labels on my own. So we have to change labels here, actually. Did these pass yet? We'll wait for these to pass as well, and then we'll... Yeah, so we've got the Miri, we've got Windows build, check compiles, not sure what that one is, build WASM, MSRV. Those should not fail. I think this is good to go, but I'll still wait for... I'll wait for green before removing the waiting on author label. Oh, that's This Week in Bevy backend stuff. So let's get rid of CLI. Let's open this. Apparently I had it open way over here. Okay, so what do I want to put here? I think I'm going to leave this on blend because otherwise mask is weird. So this example, this is going to be a binary actually. That's the way I have it set up. So this is a dissolve shader with shadows implemented in the prepass. I want to change this example to be slightly different. I feel like I can make a better dissolve shader, make it look a little better. But the example still serves its purpose. I think I'd like to get rid of some of this concrete here. Maybe choose some different textures or something like that. But the important things here are double-sided cull mode. So this is a double-sided material, and cull mode none means that we can see the other side. So that's why we see it through this kind of like holes and whatnot. The alpha mode blend is also important. Should rename this from, I guess it is dissolve extension. So We should rename this at some point. Alpha mode blend. There's a number of alpha modes that will run the shadows prepass, and there are a number of alpha modes that won't. So if you run something like multiply or opaque is probably a better example. So if you run opaque as the alpha mode, which I think is the default, then you actually don't get the prepass for the shadows. So the code that we wrote in the prepass here doesn't affect the shadows because we're running in opaque. Which I guess makes sense in some respects. But I could argue it either way, probably. But if you switch it back to blend or mask or a couple of other ones, then we do get the prepass running, and you do get this shadow effect. So we end up with something that is basically a standard material extension, right? I think probably I need to update this code to be like the more modern version of the standard material extension. But this still works. No alpha shadow, but the drawing order is still okay, or is it just luck? The depth still gets written. So depth, as far as I know, doesn't get written in that prepass unless I don't think depth gets written in that prepass at all, actually. The only reason you would want depth from that prepass is if you were using it as a texture in your main pass. So that's the only time it would get written, but you don't actually manually write it. But the depth is still there regardless, right? Like, just because the depth texture isn't getting bound to the main pass doesn't mean the depth texture isn't there being used, right? The depth comparison is like a very low-level WGPU thing. I have WGPU here somewhere. So like depth stencil attachments, we don't need. But we do have clear color. Where is this? This isn't what I wanted to look at. Why is that not auto-completing to what I wanted to auto-complete to? This would be really great for my explanation if this actually showed you what that was supposed to be. In any case, there's a compare setting for that depth in WGPU. Multi-boost sample count, texture formats. Where is that? Okay, but even with correct depth buffer comparison, the semi-transparent object might still get drawn in before the ground plane. Semi-transparent object. So the transparent render pass and the opaque render pass are different render passes. So, like, there's no way the transparent thing is going to like interleave with opaque objects. Right? Let's see if I can bring this up. I think this is going to be hard to show. But we're not using transparency either. I guess technically we have alpha blend there. But all the alpha values for that alpha blend are fully opaque. And as far as I'm aware, we're not using order independent transparency. I don't think order independent transparency is turned on by default. I think you have to turn it on unless something has changed. Order independent transparency. Toggle OIG. Yeah. So if you want order independent transparency, which as far as I'm aware, does mean that that transparency is always correct because of the inherent nature of being order independent. Right? But the transparent pass and the opaque pass are different passes. Right? So the opaque will have depth. And then I believe if you had a transparent object behind an opaque one, like the opaque one would have drawn there, so it won't get drawn there. If the transparent object is marked opaque, then it is not guaranteed to be drawn after the ground plane. I can show you, actually. Let's show, not blend, but let's go with mask. God, every time I go to stream, my neighbors smoke. I don't get it. Mask. So if we don't have the pre-pass, right, if I don't specify this, then what you end up seeing is actually just the clear color. It's not even the ground plane. So this is like already got how do I, it gets more confusing too, because there's actually multiple pre-passes that run. One of them is the shadows, right? If you're running the shadow pre-pass, the fragment pre-pass shader def isn't set. If you're running any of the normal, the motion vector, or one or two other things, so deferred is one of those things too, then you run an additional pre-pass. But the pre-passes that affect shadows aren't related to the way that the regular material will render. Those are different. So you end up with a shadow pre-pass that controls shadows. You end up with a pre-pass that controls rendering to like depth, normal, motion vector, textures if you're using them in your main pass. And then you've got your main pass, which is the actual material rendering. And then if you start talking about like the main pass and whether that is transparent or opaque, those passes don't run at the same time. And the ordering, I think, is predetermined. But I don't remember exactly where that is determined. So we might have to look it up. It depends on the render pipeline, not magic bullet. What is not a magic bullet? Order independent transparency should be correct in general. Let's go take a look at the the other thing is that some of these render phases run differently. So, for example, transparent 3D by default, if you're not using order independent transparency, has to render in a sorted fashion for all the items. But you can, if you're running like opaque, batch that all together and let them run whenever they want, because you can have that depth comparison, etc. And then there's other things too, right? Like the obvious addition to that is like frustum culling or something. But what do you that's not what you call when one thing is behind another, though. I can never remember the name of that. Occlusion culling? Occlusion culling. So occlusion culling also comes into factor here, right? Because whether things are even getting sent to the pipeline to be rendered can be affected outside of that pipeline as well, right? So if the meshes are determined to be completely occluded by another mesh, then that mesh might not even make it to the pipeline to be rendered. Otherwise, what happens is everything renders all the time, as far as I remember. How the alpha mode affects the order of drawing passes, resulting image. It depends on the rendering pipeline, not always the same for the same alpha mode. I think what's happening is those things are getting put into different pipelines, right? Like the transparent 3D pass will always render at the same time in the graph compared to the opaque. So what you're doing with the alpha mode is you're changing which one that item is in. You're not changing the order of the pipelines. So it is deterministic as far as I know. Indirect 3D. Did I just click on a random? Okay. Phase item for transparent 3D, render command, draw line gizmo. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find this exactly, but I'll look for a second. Here we go. So we've got a bunch of binned render phases, right? And then sorted render phases. This doesn't show us the order, but it shows you that like opaque is here, alpha mask is a different one, shadows is a different one, transmissive and transparent are also different. Your guess, clarification, or confusion is that everything does not get rendered if occlusion culling is activated. There is still frustum culling. If occlusion is not activated, if occlusion culling is not activated, then all of the opaque stuff generally gets rendered. I think that Bevy only recently got occlusion culling. Right. Occlusion culling, I don't think is on by default. I don't remember. Right, so occlusion culling keeps the vertex shader, does the depth check. Oh no, this is the depth repass, sorry. Two-phase occlusion culling. I'm gonna stick this over here. I like having my arm on my water bottle over here. Yada yada, there's the PR. Yeah, so if you don't add occlusion culling, which most people are not currently adding, I think, then you are not getting occlusion culling. So we do not have occlusion culling currently. This is 0.16 actually that we're looking at right now, if you're asking that question. This is the 0.16 release notes, which had occlusion culling in it, which was relevant to the thing we were talking about. So in what we're looking at with that shadow pass and the discarded fragment shader, occlusion culling is not on. It doesn't come into play. With occlusion culling, depth prepass, it downsamples a late depth prepass. So the prepasses get executed, and then any meshes that pass that check are rendered. So I would expect that if we put occlusion culling on our camera, that the prepass would run no matter what, because then we need to care about the depth values to be able to do that culling. Because we don't have it, that prepass doesn't necessarily need to run because we're not using it for anything. Everything is considered opaque, so we can't actually poke holes in stuff. And then all of the opaque stuff just gets rendered. So that goes back to when do these actually get run? And the answer is I think I don't know. Sets, extraction systems, render. Yada yada. So maybe it is based on plugin order these days. Let's take a look. Sorted render phase plugin, yada yada. Impl plugin for build, render app. Yada yada. In render. Prepare sorted render phase with the buffers. Collect buffers for phase. I don't know, actually. Okay, frustum culling, it should be pretty much always be active, even if occlusion culling is not. Yes, frustum culling is always active. Absolutely. Anything that is not out, anything that is not in the camera's viewport will not get rendered. Viewport is not really the right term. Frustum is the right term, but you know what I mean. View sorted render phases is a hash map. So that's not controlling ordering. Finish. Skin uniforms render. Init resource. Extraction, rendering. View specialization. Where's our draw commands? That's okay. This is not very helpful. Pre-pass or pre-process pipelines and GPU processing supports. View query, early GPU process node. So here's our early and late pre-processes, which we just looked at in the occlusion culling release notes. This pass runs a compute shader cull meshes outside the view frustum. So there's our frustum culling. Bind groups, GPU mesh preprocess plugin. This is what I'm really looking for, I feel like. The add render graph nodes. Here's Core 3D. So these are getting added to the Core 3D node. Late shadow pass, core 3D. We don't have add render graph node in here. Sorted render phase. Doesn't add. You're lost in there. If you find me, bring me back to the real world. Every time you go into the rendering internals, it's a total rabbit hole. Yes. Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that the code required to do things with low-level rendering APIs, even WGPU, which is like reasonably high level compared to writing everything for the hardware directly. That's why I have this other thing that I'm working on. This is broken currently. Did I change something before? Unknown identifier, why? I added an extra character. You know, if I could type cargo run, the program would actually run. That's why I have this. This is something I'm starting to build up into. Like, what does WGPU actually do with stuff? Most of this code actually, like, there's a lot of winit related stuff here. You have to have some struct that has to implement application handler for winit, and then that structures your entire application more or less. Bevy does something significantly more complicated, but every time the app is resumed, reset up all the GPU stuff. So all of the code in here down to line 168 is, for the most part, give me the device, give me the surface, give me the window, give me everything that I need to actually render a pixel to the screen. And then there's a couple lines in here that say, use this vertex entry point in this file, use this fragment entry point in this file. A couple of configurations there. We aren't storing any buffers or anything here yet. Some configuration for like the depth and whatever. And there's just so much code, and so much of it is like not what you're trying to do. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out the right way to write this such that it's not overwhelming. It feels very overwhelming. It's only 300 lines of code, but it feels very overwhelming. There's a lot of new concepts, a lot of like arbitrary function calls or things that feel very arbitrary. For example, where is it? Request device, device descriptor. Where's our down level? Do I have down level in here? I think I got rid of down level because it was a little bit more confusing than it needed to be overall. Right, compatible surface, power preferences, etc., etc. The adapter, I think this is where it would go. If you request limits that are above what the GPU can give you, WGPU will just panic. So I don't know. It takes a lot of code to do graphic stuff, especially building a whole system on top of it. And then it feels very much like everybody's building their own tower of abstraction, so to speak. But yeah, anyway. These are all different render phases. They run in different places. So you're never going to get something that runs in the alpha mask. Yes. Getting started. see if we can just see the code for text buffers, texture mapping. Can we just see? Just give me the final code, please. Anyway, it's not going to be all that interesting to look at, but and this application isn't even using something like Winit or whatever, so like even this is just like, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here's 10 function calls that you call randomly when you init. Hey Tenswo, how's it going? GPUs are just complicated beasts in general, and the APIs to deal with them tend to be very low level. That's all it is. It's not like, well, the other thing is that a lot of GPUs, like the hardware and stuff, is opaque. Like it's proprietary, for lack of a better word. So like, whereas you can run Linux and investigate the operating system for something going wrong that you think should be happening in a different way, you're not going to run and like check the GPU's implementation of something. The only way to do that is to like get results out the other end and be like, do these results match what I think they're supposed to be? Mesh pipeline is in here, right? All the way down at the bottom. What time is it? Cool. Probably got a little bit of time left. Yeah, so that prepass runs, and depending on that prepass, well, actually, in a couple of different cases, but this prepass runs, and if we don't do the logic here, then we don't cut through this object to see the back end of it. If we do that prepass, but we don't do it here, then we only end up seeing the color that is left on the front of the sphere. So like both of them have to work together to make this happen. Which is why we basically have the same code copied and pasted into two different places. But while I do think that example can be better, I do think it's okay for now. The one thing that I wanted to do is to recreate all of the... So the way we have this implemented right now is this never returns fragment output, which means that I think I might have actually implemented this. Let's see if I did. Cargo run bin. So if we open this up, here's the depth prepass image that we get from that prepass, right? Here's normals. You can see there's none. And here's motion vectors. So here's the final effect. We actually don't need the normal prepass or the motion vector prepass, so it's not terrible to see that they're not there. But different alpha modes affect that differently. I don't think we'll see this because specifically the code in the prepass isn't there to write these out. But you can see how there's no depth prepass information anymore because we're using blend instead of mask. So this stuff can get pretty confusing. It's pretty configuration dependent. So that brings me back to like, this prepass works, right? I would, generally speaking, like to write the full prepass and stick it in here and be like, this is the full thing, in case you want normals or whatever. But since this is educational, I think maybe I just leave a to-do, or like, not a to-do, but a like, the prepass fragment shader depth is responsible for controlling whether this prepass returns a fragment output or not. We never check it here. So if you were using the normal it would have no information. So can you add transparency to this example as well? You're a bit confused by all the passes, so can I add transparency to this? We are using blend. I haven't added any transparency in the sense that these never output any. But let's stick it at like 0.4 and we'll use XYZ for the output. This should be a vec4. So you see how if like something goes wrong in the main pass, but the pre-pass is still working just fine in a different file, we get the shadows, but we don't get the actual like mesh material. So can we do transparency here actually? I don't know if we can, actually. Not this easily, anyway. Oh, there we go. I was just discarding stuff and it looked like it didn't. So yeah, transparency just will work like that. But if we're discarding stuff that affects whether transparency is applied or not, right? So we get transparency here, but only if we don't discard. If we have, oh no, you know what? Actually, this is the if statement. That was my fault. Hang on. Let me explain this actually correctly. Because I put the code in the wrong spot, so this is on me. So we can actually just do transparency because we're using alpha mode blend. We can put transparency anywhere. You guess the alpha mode you return is used differently depending on the alpha blend mode. No, I made a code mistake there, just to be clear. I don't know why this was working. because this, I guess technically the discard could forward, right? If you do, if output color dot a equals 0, discard, otherwise return output color, and if it discards, then in that case I'm only setting the alpha to for the holes that we just discarded, you know, if that makes sense. This is just flawed logic. Right. This code somehow knows that the discard means that we're not going to return, but if we return outside of the if, it doesn't know that that is going to get discarded, and thus we shouldn't be returning. So it should have given me an error here, because what I meant to do is put it in here. So that's just a weird combination, probably of like Naga oil compilation mixed with the fact that I wrote this if expression or if statement, I guess, with a discard in one branch and a return in the other. Nice, but shadow is also full when transparency is active. Not sure if it is supported. What do you... Not sure if it's supported. You mean transparency in the shadow? I don't know what a transparent shadow would even be, you know? Like, shadows are meant to be blocking light, and typically, like, transparent objects don't throw shadows, like, at all. Transparent objects cast blend shadows. They do, actually. So if I... Where's our pre-pass? Let's get rid of our pre-pass. I'm just going to get rid of this pre-pass entirely. So this should be running the default pre-pass, not the one that I wrote. The issue here, if that is true, is that we are controlling the shadow. It doesn't look like this is happening in the way that I would have expected that. You need to think it's like hybrid digital version of the conceptual rendering. Yeah, but well, the thing I'm looking at is I'm not seeing the effect that you're talking about currently. Right. So we're using the standard standard material prepass. And this is a material extension on a standard material. We are returning a 50% opacity in the alpha. So maybe we just aren't setting that in the correct spot. Maybe if we set this outside, like with alpha 0.3, and rerun this, because it's not getting the information where it needs to. No, that doesn't even work. Are you saying that this should be happening with Bevy's current implementation, or that it theoretically could happen if there was an implementation for it? Like, physically, I understand that light through a window could have an effect on, you know, everything. It's both. Okay. Then I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going on here. Do we have an example in the Bevy repo of the transparent shadows? I don't think we have glass anywhere. We do have lighting, but most of the lighting that we have in the examples is like fog related or doesn't have transparent materials as far as I remember. Transmission maybe? Cube candle, candle flame, glass sphere. There we go. Specular transmission. Let's check out the transmission. Let's kill this for a moment. It's been a long time since I've run the transmission example. I'm not seeing any shadows from any glass-like materials. Oh, there's some, actually, down here. I wish I could stop this from rotating. Arrow keys. Okay, so we do get shadows here. Are those transparent shadows? I guess the candle has also got the transmission on it because it's like semi see-through, like the light permeates it. So what are they using here? Glass sphere. Specular transmission, diffuse transmission. Let's just steal their... They're changing the transmission based on the delta time? That's supposed to be the flickering candle, so to speak? Alright, in that case, let's just take the settings here. Where's our... what did we call this? It's not a marble. Glass sphere. The glass sphere has 9 and 1. Let's steal, I guess, all of these. And let's play around with those values here. None of them are getting set anywhere else, so... Interesting. Let's get rid of this alpha mode. Maybe it has to be quote-unquote opaque. No. That does look very glassy. Like significantly more glassy than it did before. You think if IOR is 1 instead of 1.5, isn't that effectively the same thing? Functionally, I'm just not sure what controls the shadow. Right, this is a standard material. It's got a white color, specular diffuse transmission, thickness, index of refraction, perceptual roughness, and then defaults for everything else. And that's on the glass. So we end up with the same settings. And maybe double-sided is messing us up. No, I mean, we can get the material to look like it should. Is there something on the camera or on the light? Point light shadow map. We're not using a point light. Maybe we need to use a point light. Point light shadow map. All we have here, I think, currently... Where's our lights? Oh, we have a point light. Shadows enabled on the point light. Should the shadow disappear when the sphere is hidden? Have you been here for long? Right now what I'm doing is, sorry, Object Like No Other mentioned that there were effectively for transparent materials, there should be blended shadows, right? So that's what we're exploring right now. We're exploring whether we can cause that blended shadow to appear. Which is why it's like this. We're using the default fragment prepass right now. The fragment prepass that we've enabled does actually have the holes in it. I don't know. I'm going to have to play with the blended shadows. For some reason, that is not happening for me at the moment. And then we want to get rid of this weird thing that I did. So this is the actual example. Squishy. This is the there are holes in the thing, it's dissolving, and the shadows dissolve with it. We were on a whole tangent. I don't have not Shadowcaster on this stuff, do I? Not Shadow. No. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to go back and check. Maybe we don't need FXAA. FXAA is old. This example has lived for, I want to say, like 10 Bevy versions at this point. But yeah, anyway, I want to do a pass on this example. Like, this works. It shows off the intended effect. The intended effect is there's a prepass. And if you discard in prepass and fragment with the right code, then the shadow will be affected by those discards. The custom shader for the shadow prepass wasn't enabled when we were looking at the transmission examples. Xavier. So that was the default standard material prepass. It's possible that I'm not doing the correct stuff in the regular material, but I don't think that that would affect the shadows. Maybe it would. Maybe I'm just wrong. Object says, yeah, it's really a stretch to support this. Very cheap in the pipeline, and it's unintuitive for a PBR pipeline. Yeah, I think that transparency on the effect is not the goal of this example, so I'm not worried about it. But I was very interested to see if that was a thing that would enable relatively easily. I think cull mode, none, double-sided, fragment pre-pass, pointing out that there's a shadow pass for the pre-pass that is different than the normal pre-pass. And just kind of showing that you can actually just like straight up poke holes through things using shaders is the point of the example. And the code here is not terribly complicated. Maybe I can simplify this a little bit. Noise, input color, simplex noise, time, stepping the alpha threshold. Yeah. Maybe multiply the material alpha with the procedural simplex noise alpha in the pre-pass shader, something like that. You're shooting in the dark. The material alpha with the procedural simplex noise alpha. Shooting in the dark for what? Trying to get the blend shadows? I think that there is no color output for the pre-pass, as far as I'm aware. Let me check. What are forward pre-pass IO? So pre-pass IO, if we are not running the shadow, right? So if pre-pass fragment the shader def is enabled, then we are not running the shadows. Shadows does not have a fragment output at all. There's no return value. We cannot set a color. There's nothing to set. When pre-pass fragment is set, that means one of the things is true. Either the camera has the normal pre-pass, the camera has a motion vector pre-pass, the deferred rendering is on for the object, or this other thing that's a little bit weird that I'm not going to talk about. To get this to work, probably per object shadow pass or something like that required, or additional shadow pass. In my opinion, if it works on the standard material and you write a standard material extension, you should be able to get all of the features of the standard material to work, or it is a bug. The thing here is that I don't know how the blended shadows work. So I'm kind of shooting in the dark when it comes to which feature or setting needs to be enabled or what we actually need to do to get that to happen. Which is why I'm kind of like moving away from it a little bit. Because I'm kind of just guessing, and I'm kind of just going to have to read some stuff and figure out where the code is or what the proper settings are. I'll probably go into this example, transmission, and just mess around with stuff a little bit. But yeah, not sure. That's one of the things that I just don't have an answer for. And I need to figure out. Did this pass? All of these passed. Sweet. This token seems to be incorrect or expired. Okay. I don't care. What? Did my GitHub extension add-on break? Let's see. Needs review. So what we did before is I updated this PR just for an example for some UI stuff. There was some feedback from one of the people that does probably the most work on UI in general. I addressed the feedback, and now it's ready for another review. Okay, let me make sure that this example didn't explode, because I just kind of like messed with a whole bunch of stuff. I wish I had like a page down. I don't have a page down. Some space. We can you ignore with git diff? Guess not. That's unfortunate. So examples. I think getting rid of that other output color is a good idea because we're discarding those fragments anyway. Add an extra comment for that pre-pass fragment. We're making this simpler rather than more complicated. Libs is going to be just that 17 RC2 update. So we're good to go here. And I guess I'll merge this whole branch because that's not what I wanted to go to. I'm going to merge this whole branch because 0.17 is coming out on Monday and nothing is going to change between now and then. Delta has some good key bindings like jumping between files and git diff. Yeah. I could set up something. I might actually be using Delta. I'm using something. I set my Git stuff up so long ago, and I just don't touch it. Let's merge this. This is all of the new 0.17 stuff for all of the Bevy examples in this repo. So we end up with Candy King, Cube Wave, the Dissolved Sphere. This is an old image. We should update that image. Did I not link that correctly? What's going on there? It's GCO main. README. Dissolve. Wait, what? Pull. There we go. Edge detection. README full output.avif. For now. Let's see. Custom phase. Custom phase is also a fun one. So why is that wrong? Is that wrong or is that just... Oh, I didn't include the exclamation point on the front. Rip. Okay, yeah, the edge detection image is now there. Fresnel effect, grid shader, blockout. Could do more, could do less. I think it's fine. I kind of reorganized the README into, because now this repo has concepts, examples, and libraries. So concepts is like hooks and relationships and spawning and stuff. Examples are things like we just looked at, like the Fresnel effect, the outline shader, the dissolve sphere, things like that. And then libraries are some things that I use in the others or are very simple libraries that I maintain. So the blockout is just a blockout material that you can throw onto anything, and it's like a world space triplanar texture. Pre-pass debug will show you. Oh, that's shader utils. Did I? I need to update that README. Hang on. Let me. Shader utils, pre-pass debug, yada yada. Bevy pre-pass debug. This isn't one that I published, so I'm not too worried about the like README being too interesting. Where are we? It's almost 10. Okay. So yeah, I have a Skeen PR up, unrelated to 0.17. I've mostly implemented the ability to like select a bunch of elements, pick the targets on those elements, and add random components to them as a group. I think there's just some UX concerns that I need to deal with. So like this layout here is really awkward. But otherwise I'm pretty happy with this. The selection for object types between what you get when you just run an operator and look at selected objects or selected IDs or whatever, and what you get when you like run it in a panel are completely different for some reason, which is really awkward. I should be able to get that in pretty soon. A lot of docs I still need to write for this. A couple of workshops that need to be updated. 2048 is up to date. Snake is work in progress. One of the things about Snake, Blockbreaker is also up to date. Floppy Corgi is most of the way through scripting, actually. Did something break over here? Yeah. Do I have this up right now? I do. Bring this over here. Oh, I didn't. Okay. This hasn't been run in a while. Question is, which one is this? It's not the one I wanted to run, actually. So 2048, Flappy Bird, both up to date. The thing about Snake, Blockbreaker also up to date, but Avian isn't going to get a release for a while, which is a little awkward. Snake and Minesweeper. are two interesting ones for 0.17. Minesweeper should be in here too. Minesweeper currently uses Bevy ECS tilemap. And I think that this in some ways makes sense. But with upstream gaining a tilemap chunk in 0.17, I'm anticipating that. Oh, did I lose internet on my laptop? There we go. Tilemap chunk should be somewhere in here. Yeah. So we've got tilemap chunk upstreamed, but there's not a lot beyond that. Like it's basically just this. It's basically just a tilemap chunk and some indices in tilemap chunk data. So it's not terribly useful yet. Exo Factory getting the nice. That's dope. Solari is also very cool. But yeah, Minesweeper, I think I moved this away from being a tile map implementation because it's in this weird in-between state where if we use a tile map, I probably don't want to use Bevy ECS tile map again. I probably want to use tile map chunk in educational material moving forward, hoping that gets better over time. And we use observers pretty heavily, which I don't think we can actually do with the current tile map chunk in Bevy. Also, clicking is a little bit awkward. I don't know if we have like screen position to tile functionality available for the tile map chunk at the moment. Or if we would have to write helpers for that. So I think this becomes just a grid, probably of sprites. Which isn't too big of a change, right? And then picking is really easy because you can just use the built-in picking functionality on sprites. That triggers observers. Observers run recursively. Thus, Minesweeper is implemented. Minesweeper is really like a, hey, look at these observers example. So yeah, I think that's going to be it for the stream today. Feeling a little bit tired, so going to cut it a little bit early. I'm going to try to stream on Monday. We'll see. Bevy 0.17 comes out Monday. I'm going to try to get that video done on Sunday. So we'll get the 0.17 actually out. Maybe do some 0.17 work on Monday while it came out. And then, yeah, we'll see. Thanks everyone for hanging out though, and I will see you in the next one.